Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain. Today, John Dyer and I will be exploring many aspects of the scientific method of problem solving. And John, as I was coming to today's podcast, I was really intrigued by the notion of really understanding what does the template even matter from our last podcast. And as I started to really think about that, I started thinking about, I wonder how many approaches or the different perspectives of approaches there is around how one gets to diagnosing a problem. And I was really intrigued about what your perspective is on that. So what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, first of all, Mohamed, people need to understand that we're now talking about difficult problems, right? Problems that are persistent, that are difficult to diagnose. The old saying, right, is that if it were easy, someone would have solved it already. So we're now dealing with problems that require multiple perspectives. So that's the reason why it would be important to pull a team together and to, really dig deep into the diagnostic tools to help really try to understand what the root cause of this particular problem is. And it may be something completely different than what you anticipated, right? I wrote a book when I was at Ingersoll Rand, a handbook, a problem-solving handbook, and it basically is designed to walk people through all the different steps in solving a problem, and it forces the team to go through all those steps. Well, when teams use that handbook, and there were several other people involved in putting that together as well, but when teams go through that handbook, they always would tell me, John, I hated it. Man, this was so painful. But then my question would be, okay, I understand it was painful, but did you end up reaching a different conclusion than what you thought going in? And 90% of the time, the answer was yes. Right? So, we tend to gravitate towards what we think the root cause of the problem is, just gut feel. But until you really take the time to analyze all the data and use the tools to properly get to the root cause, you're just going by, assumptions. So there are several tools that I like to use, fishbone diagrams is one. There's what's called the is not tool that I find very helpful. In those crime shows on TV, they always, have the board up, like with all these pictures and strings attached to try to understand who the killer was. Well, that's kind of the way I view problem solving, is that you have all these bits of data, right? And it's like, how are they connected? So the is not is a great tool to try to understand, what all those symptoms and data points really are trying to tell you. Okay, if it's in one location but not in the other location, well, what's unique about the location that's having the problem versus the location that's not having the problem? Or if second shift is encountering the problem but first shift is not, what's different about those two shifts? Or if it's happening on the weekends but not during the week. So all those things need to be factored into the discussions to try to narrow the list down to, what is the root cause. And I can tell you, having done a lot of problem solving in my career, it's a lot of times it has nothing to do with where you think the problem is occurring.
Yeah.
It's something completely different. So how about yourself? What are your experiences with diagnosing problems?
You said a lot of things here that had me thinking, and I want to just back up a few things that you said that I totally agree with. The first of all, we're not talking about simple problems here, but we are talking about linear problems that have cause and effect. Because when you get into complexity thinking and chaotic thinking, it's not a cause and effect. There's no cause and effect anymore. We're talking about linear thinking, so more complicated problems. And when you start thinking of complicated problems, this might be a Mohammed mistake that that I've learned over the years, or it might be something that I've discovered in healthcare because of the complexity of that system. But one of the things that I have discovered is most of my issues with the diagnostic phase came from how I broke down that problem. And my rushing through breaking down that problem and getting the current state out of the way to get to diagnosing phase has always led me to improperly do root cause analysis. And so, my senseis would always, would comment, would say, Mohammed, did you step in the poo yet? And at that time it felt like something stinky, but what they were saying is, in the current state, were you able to stratify it using something like the 4Ws to understand what the different areas are? Is it first shift, second shift? Like, what are we looking at here? Were you able then to break it down? And so understanding, when you do a go see and use go see tools like process mapping or waste walks or even time observations, did you know where you needed to go? Did you know that point of occurrence that it's happening, not the symptom, but the point of occurrence? And so point of occurrence is the poo. Did you step in the poo? And so, and if you did step in the poo, do you have facts now through different reasoning perspectives? Do you understand the weak signals, the things that, might, people's impressions and how they, how they behave to certain questions that you asked? And did you remove assumptions out of the way? Because there isn't a deductive importance to this because you have to use data. There's also an inductive approach to this through direct observation. And then based on that, were you able to get to a poo, a point of occurrence, and have really an understanding of how do you drill down in that? And once you're there, I personally, and until today, I find a lot of joy doing the 5 whys. And the reason I enjoy the 5 whys, initially it felt because it was easy. And then I realized it's actually extremely hard. Because one of the things I learned over the years in scientific thinking is this phase of asking the 5 whys is also a phase of showing respect for people and showing humility and showing how you are able to separate your reality from other people's reality, how you have open-ended questions. It actually starts to test your mind perspective. And are you able to shift your mind so that you show humility when you go to the floor, that you truly have curiosity versus judgment? And that is the hard part of this phase, because if you've already made up your mind what the root cause is going into it, this 5 why is an exercise that's just a waste of time. However, if you truly could push aside the things that you have, come in with facts through inductive and abductive and reasoning, and being able to say, these are casual factors. Let me drill into these factors to try to understand the root cause. And I have found 5 why to be extremely helpful. Now, once I get to a few of the what I'll call the causes, I like to do what's called the therefore and go up again to say, did this happen? Therefore, this happened. Therefore, this happened. And here's the symptom of why I'm seeing it, just to test the cause and effect process to see if it works or not. And then I have a bunch of, maybe I would call root causes often. And then I try to affinitize them. And now thinking about the fishbone, back to the other comment that you made, that because I love the fishbone as well. I sometimes feel like the fishbone is a pre-affinitized process. that already has the buckets for you, so that as you understand what are some of these factors, you're able to bucket them so you're not all over the place. And so for more I don't want to use the word simpler, but for a poo that you could smell and feel, I would say 5Y is probably a good approach. For a poo that's too big, that stinks up the whole entire place, and there's multiple factors throwing your way, and you really need to bucket things and pre-affinitize them, I would use the fishbone. Those, there's driver diagrams, there's other diagnostic tools that I have used that I think are helpful as well. But in the end, and maybe, this is a learning journey for me too, I find that it leads me towards three common root causes. And I'm not a guy that likes to go into this knowing what the root causes are, but there's always a theme around a lack of a standard, or a theme that we have a standard, it's just not being followed, or a theme around we have a standard, it's just the wrong standard. And so we need to understand and innovate and find out what the countermeasures could be to those. Now, there's many other root causes that come up, but there's always those three that find their ways into my root cause analysis as one of the driving root causes. So what's your thought?
And I think that's a great point. Because one of the things that I would say not to do when doing the root cause, because this comes up so often, is start gravitating towards the people side.
Yeah.
Right. Because, oh, well, it's because the operator wasn't properly trained. That's not a root cause. Or, the person just didn't care, or they didn't, no, that's not the root cause. Because it's you got to focus on the process. What went wrong in the process? And if the process is so poorly designed that it's dependent upon the operator doing it at exactly this right every single time, no human in history can do it right every single time, so then you have to take a step back and say, okay, what tools do we need to provide that operator? What changes, how do we foolproof it, poke-yoke the process, to make it where the operator can only do it one way and one way only. And then your comment about the poo, I like that. That's the first time I've heard that, so that's good. But keep in mind that it may not be what you think it is. One example that comes to mind, this was when I was working at General Electric making refrigerators. And all of a sudden, the refrigerators were getting rejected because of these little scratches all through the paint, right, on the case of the refrigerator. Well, we were able to trace that back, following the production line and looking at these scratches all the way to a particular piece of equipment. And so we polished, we shut the equipment down, we polished all the surfaces that touched the paint, and the problem went away. And we're thinking, okay, well, in your terminology, this is the poo, right? This is where the problem is. Well, guess what? A couple hours later, the problem came back. So we polished the surfaces again, and they went away. And, a couple hours later, they came back.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, we're not yet to the root cause, because this is this. So we got a microscope and actually looked at the scratches, and there was, at the end of every scratch was a tiny little glass bead, a ball.
Oh, okay.
And we're like, well, this equipment that this was going through had nothing like that in it. It's like it's not any kind of lubricant or anything like that. Well, next to that piece of equipment, just a little bit down from it, was a station where we were putting sound insulation in the bottom of the case, and that's a fiberglass. And it turns out, without anybody knowing it, we had changed suppliers, and we had gotten a new supplier that supplied this fiberglass. Well, this fiberglass had lots of glass dust particles, and that was right next to this piece of equipment. So the dust particles were getting onto the plates and causing the scratches. So it had nothing to do actually with that equipment. That's just where the symptom was showing up.
Yeah.
It had to do with the fiberglass station. And really, back to your comment, if you really think about it, the root cause was that we had no standard with our suppliers on how much dust was allowable coming off of these fiberglass pieces, because that had never been a problem before. So, again, it's like, well, why didn't they tell us that this was a new supplier? Why didn't we do the Plan, Do, Check, Act and do some pilot runs with material from this new supplier? And then why wasn't there some sort of a standard written in the specification about dust particles? So again, you got to make sure that you don't get too focused on one, piece of equipment or one place, because that might be where the symptoms are showing up, but it could be something completely different.
John, you just remind me of something, and let me share this story with you. It kind of piggybacks on what you just said, and I think it's really helpful for our listeners. Is when I first started in the acute care settings, the hospital settings. I've been in the medical group outpatient for a long time, and then I entered into the acute care settings. And one of my first initiatives was in the emergency department and trying to prevent people of leaving without being seen. They would come in, the wait times would be 8 or 9 hours. They would just say, I'm done with this, and then they would just leave. And so we were trying to prevent that. And there were so many factors of why these people were leaving. So we got into a room, we started doing root cause analysis, and one area took us down, hey, we need a fast track for patients. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's going to highlight something that you just said, is that, we made these assumptions that, the triage is just not fast enough. And so we need to create a fast lane and a slow lane for more complex patients. And as we started like unraveling, why are people leaving without being seen? Well, we noticed that one of our challenges is the nurses in the emergency department were transporting people upstairs and to the floors, and so that left their patients unoccupied. And so when they came back after a 20-minute run up and down for telemetry patients, they would have to attend to those. And so it made them very hard to pull patients in from the waiting room. Well, then we started asking, well, what's happening on the floors? Why can't they help like pull their own patients upstairs? And well, we noticed that they were chasing, trying to discharge patients and try to get them out. So we've started finding our poo really in the discharge process on the floor, even though everyone was on top of the emergency department, that if we, unclogged it on the back end and were able to discharge patients faster, then you're able to pull patients up faster. Yes, there's an initiative around the pull, but in the bigger picture, you can't pull if there's no bed available, and so you have to discharge them faster, and so you have to unclog it from the back end so that those patients could get into the system. And then when we started digging into the poo, what's wrong with the discharge process? It came down to not having wheelchairs. And patients that are being discharged need wheelchairs to come downstairs, and there's no one to go find wheelchairs to get these patients downstairs. So, the patient would be told, hey, you're ready to discharge now. 3 or 4 hours later, they're still in the room, and then they can't really clean the room until that patient leaves. So now you have like 6 or 7 hours that room is, really could have been filled by a patient downstairs in the emergency department, which could have helped left without being seen of the patients. But the poo had nothing to do with the emergency department. It was really in the discharge process. And when you got to the root cause, no one would have ever thought it was the wheelchair. That was the issue. And like, as you were talking right now, I was like, you know what? That was a huge aha moment for me, because no one would have went down that path. And to get the wheelchairs and have like RFIDs to understand where they are, do we have the right amount or not the right amount? Are they sanitized or not sanitized? It was a huge initiative, but we would have never embarked on that initiative if we really weren't going into this with an open eye. And yeah, did we still have a fast track? Yeah, but was that the root cause? No, that helped with a different root cause.
Right.
And so you might have multiple root causes, but the biggest one was wheelchairs. So
and that reminds me, so when you think about getting to the root cause, like you said, 5 whys, that's one of my favorite tools as well. But keep in mind, it's also important to not only go deep, but to also go wide. right? So what are all the symptoms? Not just the symptom that we notice at this particular time, but are there other symptoms that are connected to that particular symptom, right? And then when you start going deep on those different symptoms, you can start to see, are there commonalities that start to say, to start to create this picture. And, it goes back to that image of all those pictures with the strings connected to it, right?
Yeah.
Each symptom would be a different picture, and each string would represent, okay, are these connected or are they not? Because again, you might have multiple problems causing multiple symptoms that are just coincidentally overlapping each other.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out, are they connected or are they not?
Yeah, just back to the example of healthcare, like having patients getting pulled upstairs is its own root cause issue. Having a fast track, downstairs in the ED, that's a different root cause issue, because you can't pre-sort the ones that need just 20 minutes in and out. It's an anxiety attack where someone's having something more severe, and could you split those two populations? And the ones that need to be admitted, do we have beds in the ED to pull patients in? Well, you can't if there's nothing upstairs. And so
Right.
they are all connected to that same exact issue, but they all take you down different paths. And that might even bring up a whole different issue around, how are they assigning beds in the first place? And is that part of, and physician demographics, and are they all over the place in the hospital or not? And so I love what you're saying, because a lot of times understanding, like when someone is sick in real life, like a human, you don't just say, oh, they have a runny nose, let me diagnose the runny nose. Like, what other symptoms do they have? Wait, they have a sore throat and a runny nose and a fever and a bunch of dots behind their throat. The diagnosing is going to end up being strep throat, probably with an antibiotic, not Tylenol. And if you only looked at one cause or one factor, you're going to be missing out on all these other interconnected pieces that are actually going to change your diagnostic altogether. So I love what you said there. Yeah.
Right. All right. Very good. Well, we'll continue this discussion in next week's podcast. So again, thanks everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.